Welcome, everyone. Today, I really want to focus on this topic of motivation and willpower. But now we want to go beyond that, beyond willpower, harnessing habits for lasting weight loss success. So, I really like this quote. It's by Jim Ryan, who is a former Olympian. And he says, motivation is what gets you started, and habit is what really keeps you going. The thing about motivation is it really is an emotional and psychological feeling, and it doesn't really last, right? All emotions, it's like a fleeting kind of sensation. And how many of us have ever gotten super motivated about starting some kind of project, whether it be related to weight loss, or we get really fired up about something like reorganizing our closet, reorganizing the pantry, or even the kitchen, for example. But then the problem is motivation and willpower, it doesn't last, right? So we can't really rely on these emotions to keep us going. And when it comes to weight loss, it's great to have this in the beginning, as it will help us get started, but this will only last a few days, maybe weeks, maybe months even. And if that's all that we rely on, it's so easy to then go off plan, and it'll be so easy to get derailed, right? Once we're off track, when something gets thrown in the mix, like when life happens or when life is really chaotic, and then it gets easy for us to get thrown off. So really, instead of then depending on motivation and willpower alone, it becomes more useful then to really focus on developing other things that we can rely on, things like developing good habits, which then eventually become routine. And then before you know it, it just becomes second nature, and you don't necessarily even have to think about it. And then for me, for example, I was never a really big breakfast person, but now every morning I always do a Premier protein shake, right? So I don't even think about it. I just grab it out of my fridge in the morning and I bring it with me to work. And Tess and I, we even keep protein shakes here at work in case we forget to bring some in. So we have that backup. There are a lot of things that we can do in our daily lives that can become routine. It's like waking up, getting dressed, brushing your teeth, like all these things took a while for us to just have us get used to having them be part of our daily lives. So we don't even think about it, we just do it. I want to talk about this Eagle depletion theory. So this theory talks about willpower as not something that is unlimited or infinite. So it is a limited resource. And according to the Eagle depletion theory, willpower is more like a muscle. So it gets fatigued over time. The more we use a muscle, we will tire it out. So same thing with willpower. It can be depleted, and exerting self-control in one task, if we're using so much willpower to do one thing, over time, let's say as we get to the end of the day, it's harder for us to really control those urges or cravings, for example. Willpower, the good thing is it can be restored. So it's useful to take a break, and that reduces demands on self control, and it can help us to replenish that willpower. So again, to recap, so imagine your willpower like a muscle, right? If you use it too much, you will tire it out. So if you spend a lot of effort resisting things like temptations throughout the day, you might find it harder to say no to that slice of cake, since we have cake at home right now, slice of cake at night, because your self-control muscle has really worn out. So that's why it's important to find other ways to form good habits, so you can create an environment that supports those habits. And then that way you can reduce the need to really rely on willpower alone to make good choices. And I have some examples here about people, and about how initially they may have relied on willpower, but once you get into a good habit or a good routine, you can use that for more sustainable results. So we have here Miss Julia. So Miss Julia was getting ready for an upcoming high school reunion. She was very motivated to lose some weight before the high school reunion. And then what she started doing was she started running in the morning, right? So she had these high energy morning runs, and she kept doing that until her reunion. But then after her reunion, her motivation just dwindled after the reunion passed. But what she did to help herself remember, or as like a visual cue, was she started laying out her running clothes each night, to remind herself to do this in the morning, and it made it easier for her. So then months later, now she's still running daily, and now it's become more like a routine for her. So it's easier to incorporate into her lifestyle. Next story, we have Mr. Marcus here. He was diagnosed with pre-diabetes. After getting this diagnosis, he was very motivated to change his diet, change his habits. So what he did was he started swapping out fast food for more home cooked meals. Let me move this. Started swapping out fast food. Again, he opted to cook more at home. So after the initial urgency just faded, he had to find a way to really keep up with these new eating habits. So he started prepping his meals every Sunday. So then this new weekly habit really ensured that he always had healthy options to eat. From once he got everything ready, he would prep it, and then this will make it easier for him to really avoid temptations throughout the week as well. So again, over time, this meal prep activity for him became more like a relaxing ritual, and then he actually looked forward to doing this every week. And then last story, we have Miss Emily here. So she was preparing for a summer hiking trip, and she was never a big water person, and she never drank enough water until her summer hiking trip that she really had to prepare for. So what did she do? She bought a water bottle, and those water bottles that have these hourly markings, like by 9 a.m., you should be down to here by 10 or 11. And you can even find some on Amazon that have these motivational quotes on them. Keep going, almost there. So she had something like that. And that really helped her just drink consistently throughout the day. So after her hiking trip, this habit stuck, and she found that these structured intervals on the bottle, it became like a game for her, and then one that she got used to playing every day. So of course, once she hit those hydration goals, it made her feel better. She knew she was getting enough water, and that it just became a part of her life. We also have here this thing called a cue, routine, and reward loop. So I really like this loop because this is how it helps us create habits and stick to these habits long term. Starting off with the cue. So what is a cue? So there are different kinds of cues. It can be a visual cue, emotional cue, physical cue, for example. So a cue is a trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode and then which habit to use. So it can be anything really that sparks the habit. Like I mentioned before, by laying out like your running shoes or gym clothes the night before, you see that, and then the next morning, and as long as you prep before time, it's easier for you to get into that habit. Oh, everything is laid out, I'm just going to put it on. It just becomes part of your routine. A routine, so this is the behavior itself. This is the action that you take automatically in response to the cue. So again, it can be physical, mental, or emotional. Let's see. And then the last one here is the reward. The reward is the positive feeling that you get from actually doing the routine. And this reinforces that cue, routine, reward loop connection. When this habit is then formed, your brain starts anticipating the reward as soon as you encounter the cue, whether it be a visual cue. For example, you see the shoes laid out, the clothes laid out, and then this makes your routine almost automatic. And then you start craving the reward as soon as you see the cue. And that could be, I feel energized after I exercise, or you get like a runner's high, you get those endorphins, you just feel better after a walk or a run or whatever your exercise of choice is. So again, the more you do this loop, the more automatic it becomes. And eventually you might find yourself even engaging in a routine without even thinking about it, simply because you've just encountered that cue. Understanding this loop is really important because it can really help people change their habits. And by altering any one of these elements on the loop, you can change the cue or the routine. We can even shift how we behave in response to these different cues. And then I do want to go through, so what are some strategies, the routine of developing good habits? And then this slide, so this talks a little bit about just some examples of some strategies, right? How can we then build these healthy habits? So some examples to start with, and it's always good to keep in mind, we really want to be able to find your purpose, knowing your why. What is your motivation for going on this health journey? And then really identifying your goals. So we talked about setting SMART goals in the beginning. It's always good to go back and look at those things. And then when you're building habits, it's try not to set something that's so overwhelming and just doesn't seem very achievable. Start small, right? Making these small changes will make it easier for us to adapt these healthy habits. Making a plan, what we want to do, especially if it's in the beginning, and even if we haven't done this yet, it's still a good exercise to go through, right? You want to be able to keep a journal for a week or so, or at least 3 days in a row, looking at your eating habits without necessarily changing anything. What are you already doing? Looking at your physical activity, if you've started doing this regularly, checking in with your emotions to really understand what are your current behaviors and what really triggers them. And then if you want to decide, like, when am I going to start doing this new habit? Always planning these things, planning ahead makes it easier for us to turn this into a routine. Tracking your progress, right? So same thing, however you like to track. Some people still like to write everything out. You can put it into your phone if there's a calendar or a planner app that you use. Definitely use whatever is easy for you. And this will help you stay accountable to tracking your progress. Again, back to cues. This is really important. Setting up these cues, right? Things like visual cues, right? Laying out your clothes, getting your shoes out by the door, make sure that everything is set up for you. Prepping on Sundays to get ready for the week when it comes to meal prep, if you know that you have a strict schedule and then it's hard to stay on track throughout the week unless you're doing something like meal prepping, that helps too. Finding an accountability partner. So whether that's a friend or a family member, someone in the same household, they don't even have to be in the same household. That will help just keep you accountable. You can even consider joining a group as long as you have similar goals. And we do have our private face group. You can reach out to people since you're going through this journey together. Reach out to me and Tessa as well. Rewarding yourself, but really celebrating the wins. Positive reinforcement can really strengthen these new habits, and then make sure they are like healthy rewards for yourself. So things that won't sabotage your progress. Celebrate every single win, whether it's small, no matter how small it is, really, because each step in the right direction is a win worth recognizing. Be very patient with yourself. Give yourself that grace. It takes time for new habits to become automatic, to become routines. Being persistent with this really helps. And then we won't have perfect days all the time. It's almost impossible to not slip up. So keeping in mind that even if you do slip up or something happens you didn't intend for it to happen, it doesn't mean it's a failure. If you can, try not to get discouraged and just expect that there will be obstacles. And if there are obstacles, try to plan for them, have a contingency plan, and learn from the setback, but then you can just get back right on track. Eliminating temptations if you can. So if there are distractions, if you know you have certain snacks or things in the house that are just tempting, making sure to set up your environment for success. Make it enjoyable. Habits stick better when they are fun. So if you're enjoying exercise or if you get extra energized if you're listening to certain music, if you have your favorite podcast on, for example, just experiment with different things. If you know that you had trouble getting in vegetables or certain vegetables, you can look up different recipes, different seasonings, or just different ways to play it up or dress it up. It'll be a lot more enjoyable for you. And again, and then eventually creating that habit and then leading into more of a routine. Anchoring those habits to your existing routines can also make it easier to remember and adhere to. Visualizing success. I really like these vision boards that people do. Even if you go on Pinterest, for example, you can see so many examples of it. I do have a vision board and it's digital. So basically you set out these goals for yourself and then you find different images that are representative of those goals. And visualizing your success, it makes it really, like, it motivates you, and it makes it really, once you start looking at it every day, you can even recite it to yourself. It makes it easier to achieve those goals. You start believing it, and then you start seeing it come to life, and it becomes your reality. So if you don't have a vision board, I think it's something good to look into. And then finally, making it sustainable. So being persistent is definitely the key, staying focused on your goals, and then really choosing those habits that you feel like you can stick to in the long run. So not something that might take too much effort or that might seem unrealistic to do long term. So that's why it's important to start small, so you know what works for you. So when it comes to good habits, so what are some examples of some good habits? And then not just when things are normal, because we know that life sometimes throws us for a loop, like things can get chaotic pretty quickly. So what are some things that you can look to or that you can employ once things get crazy in life? So meal prepping is always good to do. Dedicating some time every week, picking out a day, depending on what your schedule is, to prepare some meals. It really makes it easy for us on those busy days, and it makes it easy for us to stay on track, stay on plan, maintain that diet. If you don't have time to work out, you don't even have to have you don't have to necessarily go to a gym unless you can. But even if you take like a quick 10 minutes, even if you're at work, for example, you can do some exercises. You can do, like Tessa and I just, what was it, like a week or so ago, Tessa, she was doing these wall push-ups right here in the hallway. So that's something pretty easy that we can do without even needing to go somewhere like the gym, without needing extra equipment, that we can start implementing into our daily life for it to become a routine. Mindful breathing, when things get really stressful, taking a couple of minutes to practice on deep breathing, even doing some meditation to help manage stress can be helpful. Healthy snacks, making sure that they're available. I always make sure I try to have some jerky with me, or even the Premier protein shakes. That way, if I have like cravings, I'll have healthy options available. Transportation. So if you have errands and things to run, instead of taking the car, and if you can, and if you're able to walk instead, or even bike, then that'll be a healthier alternative. Sleep is such a big thing. Going to bed at around the same time and waking up around the same time, making sure you're getting at least a good 7 hours of sleep really does help us, because we tend to be more stressed when we're running on fumes, when we're not getting enough sleep. And we know that people who don't get enough sleep, these people are at higher risk of weight gain and obesity, because that's when our appetite hormones really start to go up, is when we are not getting enough sleep. Digital detox, this is something that I need to work on probably more, but I think it'll be useful for us to all practice this if you are someone who tends to be on or connected digitally all times. Disconnecting from your device, maybe even setting a schedule where you're like, well, when we are sitting down for our meals, we're not going to be on our phones at all. Or after 8 or 9 p.m., no more screen time, just focus on or getting ready for bed, having a healthier bedtime routine. Water bottle companions, we have to make sure we're keeping up with our hydration. So always carrying something with us can help us ensure that we do meet our hydration goals by the end of the day. More examples of good habits. So taking a break for 5 minutes a day just for some stretching if you know you've been sitting for a long time, depending on what you do for work or what you do during the day, even if you're not working. Spending some times outdoors. We live in the Pacific Northwest. The outdoors life here is great. It is colder and rainy now, so just dress for it and prepare for it if that's something that you're able to do. Reducing like sedentary time. So if you're watching TV, there are commercial breaks, you can try standing up during that. If you're going to be on the phone or if you have a phone meeting, try standing while you're doing that. If you're like me and I'm doing notes here, like I have a standing desk at home that I pull that up, or Teth and I in our patient rooms, we have those standing desks that we can use too. That'll really help reduce the sedentary time when we're just sitting. Vegetable inclusion, if you want to make sure you get enough nutrients in every time you have a meal, making sure you include some vegetables at least for every meal. Mindful eating is a big thing. So there's so much that could be said about mindful eating. One thing I just put on here was make sure there are no distractions. That way you can just focus on eating. Because when you're distracted, if you're on your phone or if you're just not focusing on eating, it's really easy to overeat when we're not tuning into our bodies. We're not listening to see if what our hunger cues are telling us or if we're full already. Gratitude journaling. I think we did do this in one of our recent sessions, practicing writing down a list of things that we're grateful for. And I think Tessa had posted something on our private Facebook group talking about gratitude. And this helps to reduce our stress as well. Social eating plan. So I like this little tip here. If for those of us who find it difficult to control how much we eat in social settings, if we're meeting other people for dinner, if we're at a family gathering, if we're at an event, and there's a lot of food there, it's easy to get distracted and overindulge. Sometimes what we can do is we can even have a little healthy snack before we go. That way it's easier to make healthier choices. Portion control is always a good thing. So using smaller plates or bowls, instead of eating out of a big chips bag, pour it onto a smaller container, and then you can eat from that. It helps us to control our portions a lot easier. Having a good bedtime ritual again, whether that's listening to music, whatever helps you to relax, doing yoga, meditating to get you ready for sleep. Walking meetings. So sometimes people have meetings, but if you're able to, if your environment allows for this, you can walk and chat instead, if that's possible. And I did want to talk about this. So the role of environment and habit. So our environment plays such a big role. These are just some examples. My kitchen looks like the one here on the far left, but we know that if there is clutter, it's harder for us to especially in the kitchen, it's harder for us to cook, and it's harder for us to get motivated about, okay, I'm going to meal prep if your kitchen space is really hard to navigate. But also making sure that you have healthy snacks as options in the house becomes important. So it's easier to choose healthy foods when you have healthy snack options available. And I did want to talk a little bit about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So we all have our different motivations for doing what we do. And a big example would be like things that drive us internally, right? So intrinsic motivation is really driven by internal rewards, and that comes really from within. So personal satisfaction, if you find things enjoyable, or if you're interested in the task itself. And then on the opposite end, we have this extrinsic motivation. So this is really driven by external rewards. And this is when other people come into play, right? So outside factors, like if we're trying to do something so we can get external approval from people. So we know that intrinsic motivation, that tends to be more sustainable versus if we are motivated by just external factors. So really focusing and identifying whatever that internal motivation is for us. It's very powerful and can lead to longer lasting, like good habits and routine.